In today's show, we continue our season preview series looking at Toumani Camara and Matisse Thybulle, a couple defensive wings, and how they can grow their games with the Trail Blazers. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen. Coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, so make it part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. Today's show, we are getting back to it with our season previews. We are getting through every player on the roster in our Locked On Blazers countdown to tip-off, giving you a brief but thorough look at everybody. We'll talk best and worst case scenarios, we'll talk about what they did last year, how they got to the team, best and worst case scenarios, and role and expectations. If you missed any of the earlier ones, they are in your feed. If you're a YouTube viewer, there's a playlist with season previews where you can watch all of them. If you're an audio listener on whatever platform you're listening to this bad boy, the season previews are labeled as such, as a season preview. You can go back and listen to all of them. It's a great jumping off point if you are new to the program, or if you're new to the Blazers this season, or you just want to get maybe you're catching up on old shows and you just want to get caught up on everybody who's going to be involved. We're going to do it for everybody on the team. Today, we're getting defensive and hoping we add a jump shot. We're talking Toumani Camara and Matisse Thybulle. Let's look back to look ahead. We'll start with Toumani. We'll roll with Matisse. We'll get everybody done. Let's do it. Toumani Camara was acquired as part of the Damian Lillard trade. He was the 52nd pick in the draft by the Phoenix Suns, played in Summer League with Phoenix, and then right before training camp when the Blazers completed their trade to send Damian Lillard to the Milwaukee Bucks as part of a 3-team deal that landed them DeAndre Ayton and a rookie with an intriguing name from the Phoenix Suns. Toumani comes over and joined the team just before training camp, and it was clear early in preseason, like maybe the first preseason game that he played, it's like, oh yeah, this dude's got some stuff. And then by the end of preseason, it was clear that he was probably going to play. And the question was how much he was going to play. And quickly it became, when is he going to start? We'll get there in a moment. On the year, Toumani Camara, 7.5 points, 4.9 boards, 1.2 assists, shot 45% from the field, 33.7% from the three-point line, and 75.8% from the free throw line, playing 24.8 minutes a night, basically half the game, 25 minutes a night across 70 games. But he spent the first 9 games coming off the bench. He clearly won himself a rotation spot in training camp. There was a little bit of buzz about him, but you don't see it, right? But when we saw it in preseason, it was like, oh yeah, this dude can hoop. This is a fun lefty, who's got some stuff to his game, and the Blazers were so young and so new that someone was stuffed to their game. It's like, let's see what they got. Spends the first 9 games coming off the bench. Then he starts the next 29. He replaces Matisse Thybulle in the starting lineup. He starts the next 29 games. And then mid-January, he goes back to the bench. He kind of struggled shooting early in the season, and then he started shooting a little bit less, and then he was kind of, his decision-making just got a little wonky in there. There was a certain point where it was like the negatives on offense were outweighing the positives that he was bringing on defense, and he was just had a little chaotic stretch, right? It was just a little too much chaos, not enough reliability, and it was worth giving it another, someone else a shot in that lineup that Toumani hadn't solidified himself as clearly deserving of that role, and he wasn't really getting a major reduction in minutes. It was just kind of shaking things up. Jabari Walker replaces him in the starting lineup, and he basically spends a month out of the starting lineup. He regains his spot in mid-February, just before the All-Star break. It's basically 10 games, 12 games, but it's like he started and then went back to the bench, but he was like, but for real happens right before the All-Star break. Okay, Toumani's going to start. And then he plays well down the stretch of the season. He's starting to play well. And I think his best stretch, I think the best basketball he played overall was right before he gets hurt and his season ends. He plays about 4 games in a row, maybe across about 10 days, 12 days, where it's like, I was really excited to see what Toumani was going to do to end the season, because he was going to get a big minute role. He was going to get to kind of expand what he was maybe capable of, or had shown that he was capable of, and show he could do more. And because of like the Blazers were not going to play their sort of regulars and head to their tanking mode as they do in the spring, it looked like Toumani was going to get a chance to spread his wings a little bit. But he had a really severe ankle injury against the Hawks, and it was clear he was going to miss some time. And then like basically that was on March 27th. With 2 weeks left in the regular season, it just became inevitable that he was not going to come back. But what really changed for Toumani was that during the second half of the season, he shot it really well. This is the difference in Toumani, as he was clearly a impactful defender, a good cutter, and a guy who plays hard, always. But for the first 31 games of the season, he was also someone who shot bricks. 29.4% from three. Hard to be a 3-and-D wing, which is kind of what he profiles as, if you don't shoot very well. And some of the hustle stuff, like, you know, you can be a good cutter, but if they're just like not guarding you, you're just cutting into your waiting defender who's sagging off of you. But the final 39 games of the season, on relatively low volume, Toumani Camara shoots 37.9% from three on 2.2 3-point attempts per game. He's got to up the volume, but that's the path for him. To be the impactful defender that he was, and the advanced impact stats suggest that he was just a very good defensive player, period, full stop, as a 23-year-old rookie. And then the final 39 games of the season, he shoots 37.9% from three. Again, really low volume. 2.2 attempts is really not enough to say like, oh yeah, he figured out how to shoot. But I think he kind of edited a little bit, because he was shooting about 3 a game and shooting 30%, and then he got down to like shooting a little bit less, 2 a game, and shooting a lot better. He was a little smarter about the shots he took, and they went in a much higher clip, and I thought he improved. Like, this is a dude who got better as the season went on, which is exactly what you want to see. That was Toumani's season. What about Matisse Thybulle? Matisse Thybulle signed a 3-year, $33 million offer sheet from the Dallas Mavericks in free agency. But coming off his rookie scale contract, he was a restricted free agent, so the Blazers chose to match that deal. They said, Matisse, you ain't leaving for nothing. Come on back. And after a intriguing half season in Portland when he came over the trade deadline last year, his beginning of the season in Portland was pretty good. Although he did lose his starting spot to Toumani Camara. Matisse Thybulle, all in all, averaged 5.4 points, 2.1 boards, and 1.4 assists. He shot 39.7% from the floor, including 34.6% from three and 75.9% from the free throw line. He played 22.9 minutes across 65 games. Clearly, he was the favorite to start at small forward coming into the season. He doesn't lose that job in training camp. He starts the first 9 games. And then Chauncey Billups decides to make a change. It wasn't so much that Matisse Thybulle lost the starting job. It was that he wasn't so impressive that he demanded to keep it, and Toumani deserved more minutes. Like, Toumani was like, clearly he adds more size. Like, he's 6'7". Matisse is more like 6'5", 6'6", and they're just like, Toumani's just bigger, right? He's just bigger and stronger. There's different players, and what Matisse does is different. I'll talk about this more later in the show, but they're different players. They're both good defensive players who need to improve on shooting to really hit, but like the way they go about it is very different. So Matisse moves to the bench, but he didn't really lose like minutes necessarily. Like, there were some nights when he would have probably played more in a starting role, but he didn't really necessarily lose like a ton of minutes. Like, if he was going to play 23 and some change as a starter, he was playing 21 and some change as a bench guy. But he begins the season shooting really well. When he came over at the trade deadline the prior season, he finished his Blazers. He finished the season out with the Blazers shooting really well from three, and I was like, all right. Like, this is intriguing. Maybe he just needed to get away from Philly. Maybe he needed to be empowered a little bit. Maybe he just needed the green light. Like, hey, you can shoot no matter what. The stakes are a little bit lower. Find your rhythm, and we'll make sure that you have a spot. And then he starts out the first half of the year up until December, up until the calendar flips at the end of December, shooting 37.7% on 4 attempts per game, 3.9 attempts a night. That's really that's like, for what Matisse does, like, because he's not really a driver, he's not really like the way he's going to score on offense is probably just shooting, like, just because he doesn't have a lot of the skills. That's like his sort of skill set. But if he's going to shoot 4 threes a game and make 37.7%, basically 38% above league average, he's a hooper, right? He's a player. Then he's like useful, and he can ply his unique defensive gifts, because you're not going. He doesn't hurt you on the offensive end, because again, like, he doesn't have a ton of stuff. Shooting is the thing that's going to unlock his ability to be a contributor. He said as much at media day. He knows what the deal is, and he came out firing over the first 30 games. Then the calendar flips, and he just lost it. Over the final 33 games of the regular season, he shot 31% from three on 3.2 attempts. He started not making them, and then he started not shooting them. From 4 to 3 is like doesn't seem like maybe a big number, and it's probably not on any given night. It's a big number, but a 25% reduction in like number of a 25% reduction in number of shots you're taking is really big for a low volume guy. That's really, that's kind of the difference in taking good ones versus just like passing up shots that you need to take. And in the modern NBA, passing up shots is bad news. You see it a lot less now. You more often see guys who just everyone shoots them whatever, but like Matisse would pass up some shots. He lost some aggression, and he lost some aggression because he just struggled to shoot from three a great deal. And that 31.8% was actually an uptick. He was below 30% for much of 2024 when the calendar flipped. The first couple months, January and February, were not kind to him, and he kind of found it late in the season. He sustained a ankle injury towards the end of February, early March. He tried to play through the ankle injury all of March, but he just played 2 total games after March 15th, 2 of the 12 games after March 15th. Like he tried to play, 2 games and 12 total minutes after March 15th. He tried to play, mid-March. He's trying to come back. He plays a game up, 4 minutes, can't go. Takes 4 games off, comes back again. What the Blazers called ankle impingement, and his season eventually ends. That's what Toumani and Matisse did this season. That was their last season. What I want to do in the second segment is talk about what's next. We look backwards. Now it's time to look forwards, and I want to talk best and worst case scenarios. These are best case scenarios within reason and worst case scenarios without injury. That's what we'll do in the second segment. Join me there, won't you? First, though, I want to tell you about a deal. The good folks at FanDuel want to hook it up. I have told you. You haven't told me. I'm the one who talks. You listen. That's the relationship we have right now. I've told you about FanDuel a lot. They've been a long-time advertiser, and I've told you many times they're America's #1 sports book. But right now, and you are listening to Friday, September 20th show, go get on this. If you've been thinking about getting on this deal, go ahead and get on it. Right now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, all of y'all, new customers, old customers, everybody can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, if you got a YouTube TV base plan, once you got that and you make your $5 bet on FanDuel and you get that 3-week free trial code, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. If you are considering doing this, the deal ends this weekend. It ends on September 22nd. If you've got access to FanDuel and if you are already use YouTube TV or considering making the switch, this deal is not going to be around next week. Next time I talk about FanDuel, we're going to be talking about other stuff. So go take advantage of it. Visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sports book. All right, let's talk best case and worst case scenarios for Matisse Thybulle and Toumani Camara. We'll take them one at a time. These are, again, to remind you, best case scenarios within reason. So like we're not talking about MVPs for dudes who can't win MVPs, and worst case scenario without injury. We're talking about things that happen inside the lines. We do this for every player on the roster. Let's do it for Toumani Camara. The best case scenario for Toumani Camara is that he establishes himself as a starting NBA forward. In his second NBA season, when we get to the end of it, he leaves no doubt about it that he is an impactful enough player to start NBA games, period, full stop. That's it, and that's all. That he's an NBA starter. In year one, Toumani Camara was a good defender. And a good defender by any way you measure it. If you want to measure it by rookies, an excellent defender, one of the best defenders in his class. And when you draft someone at 23, you kind of hope, he's a guy who played 4 years in college at Georgia and Dayton. When you draft someone like that, you kind of hope they come in with a thing. Like, okay, this is a thing. This guy's like a little further along. Young players typically develop more stuff than older players, and once you get a little bit older, it's more about sharpening your skills. So if you are a little bit on the older side for rookies, if you're not a teenager but you're a 23-year-old, it's like, I hope he has a thing. Toumani Camara came in with a thing. He is a good defensive player at the NBA level. Excellent for a first-year guy, and just a straight-up good one, like a positive defender for any level of player. He's 6'7". He guards in a bunch of different ways. He can guard point guards. I don't think he can guard up a ton, but he can guard most NBA power forwards because that position doesn't really exist anymore. He's not gigantic like where you have like a big size advantage if he plays at the 4, but I think it's not wild to play him at those positions, and he can guard 1, 2, and 3 just fine. The Blazers allowed him to press basically as much as he wanted, maybe to the detriment of a team at some point, but they kind of unleashed him to go do what he does, and they didn't ever hold him back or call him back. They let him play super aggressive, sometimes maybe to a fault. But again, he showed that he is capable. He's showed that he is versatile, and he shows that he's physical. And that gets you the starting point. And the best case scenario is that the starting point grows. The starting point being a pretty darn good defensive player who showed some shooting chops in the second half of his rookie season is pretty intriguing. And the best case scenario is that the shooting sticks. He continues to be a really smart cutter. The Blazers introduce some other ways to get him involved on offense, and he finds a way to be impactful on that end of the floor. And then when we get to April, when we get to the end of the season and things are winding down, the Blazers have at least one very easy check mark. Toumani Camara is an NBA starter. Our other questions we have can be answered, or at least will have to involve the answer that we have, a certainty that we have that Toumani Camara is a legit NBA starter. The worst case scenario is that the offense just doesn't come around. And with someone who doesn't have a ton of wiggle as an off the bounce, making plays off the bounce as a ball handler, and doesn't have a bunch of high level passing chops as a playmaker, and isn't quite big enough to be like a true 4 in the league, ends up pigeonholed as a defensive specialist. And anytime they use the word specialist in the modern NBA, it means that you're not special. Because the NBA in its current form values versatility and the flexibility to play across positions and to be used in multiple ways. The NBA values you to not be a specialist, but to be a generalist, a high-level generalist. And the worst-case scenario for Toumani Camara is he gets pigeonholed into being a defensive stopper, and a defensive stopper reads as a backup. Because it's really hard to be an Andre Roberson in the modern NBA. It's really hard to even be a Thabo Sefolosha in the modern NBA. You've got to be someone who plays both ends, and you got to be able to play both ends at least moderately well. And the worst case scenario is that Toumani showed what he showed last year. He's a good defensive player, and that's where the sentence stops. What's the best case scenario for Matisse Thybulle? It's that the 2 half seasons of positive shooting that he has shown for the Blazers, in about 55 games for the Blazers where he has been an above average 3-point shooter in the league, it sticks around for 65 games. The best case scenario is that Matisse Thybulle, who is a unique NBA player, one of the great defensive playmakers across the league, perhaps no one is a better off-ball disruptor, and certainly no one at his size is a better off-ball disruptor than Matisse Thybulle. There's probably guys who are a little bit bigger who are better at it just because of sheer size. But to be, 6'5", 6'6", probably more like 6'5", and to be the type of disruptor that he can be, the best case scenario for Matisse Thybulle is that he just is that, because he's far enough into his career that he is that. We are confident that he can make plays as a defender. He is a dude who's going to get in the passing lanes. He's going to block shots from behind. He's going to take weird angles. He's going to bait guys into throwing passes they don't want. He's going to sag off you so you think you have a jump shot and somehow block your jumper. He's one of the great jump shot blockers in the league. He's just a really good defensive playmaker, and the best case scenario is that not only can he play that side of the ball, but the shooting that he has shown flashes of in 2 different stints with the Blazers sticks around for an entire year. Players who have been in the league as long as Matisse pretty rarely take big leaps. So the idea that Matisse Thybulle is going to become like a high-level offensive player, I think, is probably outside of what I would call within reason for best case scenario. But the idea that he could shoot above average for an entire season from what we have seen, I don't think is outrageous. He's a career with like 35-ish% 3-point shooter. We're talking, to get to the league average for his career, we're talking like 4 makes a season over his first 4 years in the league. He's never been someone who has shot well. It's always been the question mark with him, and Matisse has been very open and honest about that being his limitation in the league. And the best case scenario is that with a clear understanding of what he needs to do and the maturity that comes with entering season number 6 in the league, Matisse Thybulle becomes the knockdown shooter on just stand still, catch and shoot shots. He becomes a knockdown shooter on those shots and allows himself to be the fully realized best version of Matisse Thybulle. And his play and his success creates a confusion about who is part of the plan going forward and creates a logjam on most nights because Matisse Thybulle's good enough to play and he starts the season on the edge of, on the back half of the rotation. The worst case scenario is basically the Matisse Thybulle that played the second half of last season. It's a guy who's a below average 3-point shooter, loses a little bit of confidence on offense, and then you don't feel as good about playing him as much. So so he's limited. He naturally limits his own minutes because of what he brings on offense. And so he's like a 20-minute, he's a defensive specialist. He is a guy who comes in and can make plays. And if he's rolling and has it going on offense, he can stick. But if not, he's playing 10 minutes a half and he's a 20 to 22 minute a night guy because you just need to score more in the modern NBA. And because of Matisse's unique defensive style, it's not like he can guard every single player in the league. He's good at what he does, but he's not like a sit down and lock you up type of guy. And the worst case scenario is that Matisse Thybulle is a dude who is not quite good enough on offense to unleash what he's really good at on defense. Let's talk role and expectations for these dudes. I think they're going to have similar roles, but I think they have differing expectations. Let's talk about that to close the show. Join me there, won't ya? Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You're still listening to Locked On Blazers. Talking to Toumani Camara and Matisse Thybulle. Best and worst case scenarios we knocked out. What we do to close the show in these little player profiles, they're big player profiles. I don't want to... No diminutive descriptors there. Talk role and expectations. The role for both of these guys is relatively similar. I don't think either of them are going to start. I think the starting forwards are pretty obviously Denny Avdia and Jeremy Grant. But I think both of them are in the night one rotation. Chauncey Billups has typically gone 9 deep. I've asked him about this in the past. 9 is the number he prefers. He doesn't want to play 10. He might have to begin this particular season, run a 10-man rotation. I generally think 9 is the right number. Chauncey has been a 9.5 guy too, and by that I mean he plays 10 guys in the first half and 9 in the second half. 9 is the number. Off the bench, I think you can pretty obviously say that either Scoot Henderson or Shaedon Sharpe doesn't start and is going to play. So I think that 6 is pretty much a lock. We'll call it Scoot Henderson as your 6th man. The first guy off the bench is Scoot Henderson. That's a lock to play. One of the centers, either Donovan Clingan or Rob Williams, is a lock to play because I need backup minutes at center. So I'm going to pencil in Donovan Clingan because I think there's more certainty about his early season availability as I sit here in September and record this. That's 2 spots. I think 8 and 9 are pretty obviously Toumani Camara and Matisse Thybulle. I think Toumani is an absolute dead set lock to play. To me, he's a lock to play. Too good last year, too impactful, young, part of the sort of like the big trade. There's some franchise investment, maybe not like massively in him being good, but like he was a win last season. He was a clear franchise win. He's probably one of the few like easy say like this part we got right type of things from all of last year. He's going to play. And I think Matisse is going to play because I think Billups likes what he does clearly prefers, appreciates what Matisse Thybulle brings to the table. I think that's your 9. 10 would be Rob Williams if he's healthy, or if not, there's 10th is probably Jabari Walker, but these 2 dudes are going to play. They're bench forwards. These are your bench wings, I should say. Matisse doesn't have a lot of space to play 2 next year, so he's mostly going to play next to 2 guards as a small forward, which isn't ideal because he's not gigantic, and he's a unique player. He's not a sit-down, in a stance, lock-you-up defender. He is an off-ball disruptor. Toumani is a sit-down, in your stance, lock-you-up defender. They're very different in what their gifts are, although they are both impactful on defense. I think, and this is like a pet peeve of mine, that people too often talk about defense as a singular thing. Oh, how is his defense? It's like, well, if you ask Matisse Thybulle to be the point of attack defender for 35 minutes, he's not going to look nearly as good as if you ask someone else to be the point of attack defender and you say, Matisse, make plays off of this guy's aggression, and he will look great. And then you'll be like, oh, he's good on defense because the ask is different. So that's just a personal pet peeve. That's a language thing. He's good. He is a really good off-ball disruptor. He's not a sit down and guard type of guy. And then that's why playing him at the 3 next to 2 guards is like, it's not an ideal fit. And that's what I want to talk a little bit with Tease here. It's like, he seems to be, I mentioned this a bunch. I don't think Jeremy Grant's really in the way of anyone. I don't view DeAndre Ayton as in the way of anyone. I don't really view Anthony Simons as the way of anyone. Like of those vets, like there's plenty of minutes for the guards, for the 3 guards to play for the guard minutes. Jeremy Grant, they're going to need what he does. They need a skill set to be functional. He's not in the way. Neither of the other centers are ready. Donovan McClain just isn't ready to play big minutes. They're going to need DeAndre Ayton to soak up minutes. They're going to need him to play 32 minutes a night, 29 to 33 minutes a night, and just like go. They need him, right? When you get to the back half of the rotation, though, Rob Williams kind of confuses things a little bit with Donovan Clingan, although that might take care of itself. But Matisse Thybulle is like, early in the season, I don't think you're going to feel like Matisse Thybulle is stealing minutes from Chris Murray and Jabari Walker. Like, I just don't think that it's not going to feel like that. It's just he's playing because they need him to play. But there might come a time when, because the guard spots are spoken for, and we're assuming like near perfect health in these projections, or close to perfect health. Obviously, it's not going to work out that way. But just to talk about the minutes, I think it's easier to assume folks are healthy. Like, because there aren't real obvious minutes for Matisse to play at the 2 necessarily, and he's mostly going to play the 3. That means that there's like toggling forward minutes. There aren't really a ton of, if him and Toumani come off the bench, those are the forward minutes spoken for. It's hard to find ways to get Chris Murray and Jabari Walker into the lineup. And maybe, those guys have to earn it, and that's like the nature of a basketball team. But if you're talking about someone who's sort of blocking young players, Matisse Thybulle, who's not old, and he's number 6, veteran, certainly a veteran presence on this team, he's sort of blocking guys. Like I think he, like, quote unquote there, not in a real way. And I don't think it's as simple as, they can just trade Matisse. It is that simple, right? The way that the league works now is that every team has a mid-level exception to use. They can use the mid-level exception if they haven't used it as a trade exception. So a lot of teams could absorb Matisse Thybulle if they have the money to make it work without sending money back. So he's tradable, but I don't think he has a ton of like standalone value. The Blazers acquired him as part of a 4-team trade, but essentially they traded 2 second-round picks to acquire Matisse. And I'm not sure that his value, while in his season and a half with the Blazers, has drastically changed. So, like, if you're saying, they can just trade him, they certainly can. It's just like not for a ton. And if you're not trading Matisse Thybulle for a ton, kind of what's the rush? Maybe that's something you do at the trade deadline, but what's the rush to get 2 second-round picks? So, I think my expectation for Matisse Thybulle is that his production, particularly on offense, will kind of determine what the route is. If he's good, you let him go. We set it and forget it. If he struggles a little bit on offense, I think he's the first guy you say, hey, you're going to pick up some DNPs because we're going to try out Jabari Walker in these minutes. We're going to try out Chris Murray in these minutes. Like, we're going to give another young guy behind you. If you're going to play 18 minutes in these games, we're going to let them play, just for the next 4 games, we're going to give them a chance to earn these minutes type of thing. I think that's the most realistic role for Matisse. And certainly if the Blazers make some trades, he could be involved in them. That's like the nature of the roster. For Toumani, I don't think he has necessarily a path to losing minutes that way. Like, I think he's a lock to play on night 1, and I don't think, because of his age and the relative age of Chris Murray, they're basically the same age, and kind of the differing in skill sets between him and Jabari Walker, I don't think there's like, I think it's relatively unlikely that Toumani is just like out of the rotation. Obviously things change and guys develop, and if someone takes a big leap, it could change. But from sitting here right now, I think Toumani's like a lock to play. He played 24.8 minutes a game last year. I think he's a lock to play 2 more minutes a night, something in that range, like 25.8, 26 and a half minutes a night. Maybe right there at 24 again, depending on how much they lean into Deni Avdija, who's obviously in front of him and is straight up better than him. Yeah, I don't think 2 is necessarily has a path that's like where he could lose minutes. I think Matisse has a path where he could lose minutes. I think both these guys start in the rotation. I think both these guys play, half the game. For Matisse, a little bit less than half the game. I think they mostly slot in at the forward spots, just judging by the health of the guards and how much franchise investment the Blazers have in just like getting Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson 30 minutes on the court and a bunch of time together and see what it looks like. That's important to them. And because Deni Avdija is like a young newcomer who's generally the same age as Toumani and is better. It's not like Toumani's not going to jump into the starting lineup unless there are trades or injuries or whatever. So Toumani doesn't really have a path to play a lot more, but he also doesn't really have a path to play a lot less. But I think he does have a path, as mentioned in the best case scenario in the second segment, to be good enough that he offers some confusion. And I think that's really what you're kind of hoping for this Blazers season, is that enough young guys pop, like, okay, Deni can really hoop. Okay, Toumani can really hoop. Okay, wow, Matisse is playing a lot better. Enough of those guys who are like, in their early, first half of their 20s, Matisse a little older, but first half, that age, like where it gets confusing on game night who deserves to play, because you have enough productive players that it gets tricky. And then you're like, well, shoot, there isn't even minutes to even think about Rayan Rupert because all these dudes are hooping ahead of him. Like that's what you're kind of hoping it works out for the Blazers, is that they're like have enough dudes hit their ceiling or close to it, like in terms of like reasonable production, that it gets a little bit tricky. But I think for the most part, Toumani has both a ceiling and a floor on his minutes, and Matisse has a little bit more of a trapdoor situation. Okay, that's 5 shows this week. It's good to be back. I have not done 5 shows in 6 weeks. It feels good to do it again. I'm happy to be talking into the microphone. Hopefully in the leading up to the season, as the rest of the media world gets back into thinking about the NBA, get some interviews coming up here. I didn't try to get one this week, so it's not like I missed out on one, but I do understand that this show is best as a conversation. I try to, for my new listeners, to get one interview a week in each of these 5 shows, and I will continue to try to do that as we get closer to the season. That is a promise that I will hopefully keep up all year long. Doesn't always work out, but I do my best because I want to make the show the best for you. If you appreciate this show in its current form and what you hope it can be, share it with a friend. You can subscribe, you can leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you are listening to it on audio. You can smash that notification button on YouTube. But the thing that I would appreciate you to do the most is to tell a friend. It is Blazer season. It is coming quickly. It is approaching. We're 10 days out from Media Day. Just say, hey, the Blazers podcast I listen to is called Locked On Blazers. It's free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And then come back for Monday's show. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.